Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Konrad Stump with the Springfield-Greene County Library in Springfield, Missouri. I'm also on the selection committee for Summer Scares, and I am the programming consultant and co-produced the Summer Scares programming guide. I'm very excited for our panel today. We are joined by Alma Katsu, whose novel The Hunger was chosen as a 2021 Summer Scares selection, Kathe Koja, whose novel The CIPHER was chosen as a 2021 Summer Scares selection, and Daniel Kraus, whose novel Rotters was chosen as a 2019 Summer Scare selection. Welcome, everyone.
Hi.
I want to start with just allowing you guys to introduce yourselves. If you want to tell us a little bit about your work in general and about your title that was chosen as a Summer Scare selection. So whoever wants to start first.
Oh, that's just death. No one wants to be first. All right, I'll be first. My name is Kathe Koja. My novel, The CIPHER, was chosen for this year's Summer Scares. And this is a book that's basically about what happens when nothing becomes very real and you can't get away from it, which is not surprisingly, I guess, something that scares a lot of people. It certainly scares me. My own work has ranged from horror to YA to historical fiction to things with no names. And I'm very excited to be part of this program this year. Libraries have been huge to me throughout my life. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more later, but especially during the pandemic days, my local library was one of the places where normal life was, excuse me, was still going on. And they went out of their way to make sure that patrons could still access the library. So to be able to do something and talk to librarians and be part of the library system is a big deal for me.
Yay, libraries. I'm a big fan, obviously. Alma, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Alma Katsu. My book, The Hunger, was chosen as one of the Summer Scares books. I'll show you both covers because I love them both. I'm really thrilled with that. I write, I guess I'm primarily known for writing historical fiction that has a horror twist to it, but I also had my first spy novel come out this year. But let's talk about horror. So The Hunger is a reimagining of the story of the Donner Party, and it has a little horror twist to it. And you know, a lot of people have asked me, why add horror to the story of the Donner Party? Isn't it horrible enough? But it was a lot of fun, actually, doing that. And the most interesting thing I've learned from writing these books is how often, you know, what we experienced in the past is still relevant to us today. And so hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit. But I know we're going to talk about libraries, and I'm really excited, just like Kathe, to talk about them. They've been a very big part of my life, as I'm sure they're a big part of most authors' lives.
I think I will now talk. Right? I was waiting.
That'll work.
I'll just talk. I'm Daniel Kraus, and I am an author of various types of books. A lot of them are horror or horror adjacent, but I've also done, like Kathe, I've done YA stuff and historical fiction stuff and comic books now. So the book that I had a Summer Scares title involved with was Rotters from a couple years ago. And this is a book about sort of an underground network of modern day grave robbers. Should we talk about Ahmed here at all? Like, I know I'm here partially because Ahmed couldn't be here.
Yeah, that's right. You were gracious enough to join us today because the author of our third adult title for Summer Scares this year, Frankenstein in Baghdad, wasn't able to be here. So I know that you're a fan of Frankenstein in Baghdad. And so I was just kind of curious, you know, what really stood out about it to you, and, you know, why you think readers should pick it up and how it engages horror in a unique way.
Well, it's really a great book. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it's his first book. It's, you know, there's lots of Frankenstein reimaginings out there. You know, every year you get a lot of Frankenstein and Dracula retellings in one way or another. But I think it's among my very favorite. There's a great book by Laurie Scheck called A Monster's Notes, which is has always been my favorite Frankenstein riff. Very idiosyncratic, highly literary, poetic, strange book. Ahmed's book is, it kind of resets it in, I think, modern day. It's been a few years since I've read it. Modern day Baghdad, where the main character is sort of collecting body parts that are strewn around in the city from bombings, and then the monster comes alive. And then there's sort of a side story about a mother who thinks the monster is imbued with the spirit of her son returned from war. And it's a really fascinating take, and of course it's beautifully written, but there's this really interesting thread through it where the monster is, he thinks of himself as kind of a composite victim, because he's built from all these victims, but also as his own extremist. It's a really cool book, and anyone who's interested in a sort of political slant on Frankenstein would be well advised to pick it up. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting about it is that, and just horror in general to me, it takes this thing that is almost too difficult to process on its own, and it gives it this sort of speculative slant, so that it's, a way the reader can approach it without being bogged down mentally as much by like the actual horror of the story. So that's something that I really like about it.
Yeah.
And then, so Kathe and Alma, you both touched on this, and Dan has been kind enough to do things with my library a couple times. I want to talk about, the role of libraries in your lives, first sort of growing up, and what kind of role they might have played when you were a kid. And even if they didn't really play a big role when you were a kid, sort of how you got into reading and how you fostered your love of reading, because that's part of what Summer Scares is about, is to foster a love of reading through the horror genre in all ages.
I remember going to libraries from being, a tiny child, and I think they're intellectual safe spaces. You don't think of that as a kid. When I was little, there was still the segregation of the adult and the children's section and the card, and I remember getting my first adult card and feeling like, look out for me. But I had also been going in those stacks anyway and reading the books, so I knew the books that I wanted to take out. And that feeling of being in a protected zone, because you're in the library. It's a place where you're happy, a place where you feel free. So that you'll be able to explore and range as far as you want, but it's still within this place where you can go as far as you need to. And as I got older and learned the joys of interlibrary loans, which I use recklessly, just recklessly, to have all those books available and to have a literal network of people who will, I know that we can get them, but to have a literal network of people who will make sure that I can get an obscure research text if I need one, and have sometimes gone not only above and beyond. I remember telling one of my local librarians, it's okay, there's like one copy of this somewhere. She's like, I'm getting it. She did. It's like from some obscure library in Rhode Island. I've been reading and writing since I was 5 years old. So this is who I am. And those places were, both the home and the temple. They were everything.
I mean, very similar for me. I grew up in a very small town in Massachusetts, and I came from a fairly disadvantaged family. So it wasn't like we were going to be running to the bookstore buying books every month or something. So, the library in that town, which was tiny, you could fit in my house right now, which is not a big house. you know, I lived in that place. I remember spending so many hours, you know, sitting on the floor and reading. I spent so much time there. Eventually, they asked me if I wanted to be a page in the library, and then I would get paid at least for some of the time there. And you know, it was really an act of kindness for them to extend that job offer to me. So, you know, I went from reading all the time to, I remember like watering the African violets and, you know, keeping the card catalogs, you know, filing new cards and things like that. And just like Kathe, I read crazily indiscriminately, like, you know, just from the children's section through the adults, just picking books off the shelves and reading them. And it really, you know, not only made me the writer that I am today, but made me the person that I am today.
Yeah, you know, my library, and I grew up in a small town too in Iowa, and we had this small but really beautiful old Carnegie library that had these great carvings around the sort of arc entry, and it had this owl at the center with these jade eyes, and it was kind of creepy. And there was a lot of things about this library that were kind of creepy. Like it just was this old fashioned, stately, a little bit cold. There was this, for some reason, right inside there was this gigantic, like bison head. And it was really scary because you'd have to pass beneath it. And it was this huge, massive animal. I don't know why I was there. And then in the library proper, there were all these kind of like around the periphery, these old, you know, white, you know, blank-eyed statues. So the whole place was kind of creepy. And sort of in the shadow of all that, I did a lot of browsing of the stacks, which is really something that an online browsing can never really replicate. It's sort of the same phenomena as with before streaming, and you would turn channels, and then maybe you'd stumble upon something that you might never choose if it came to streaming, but you might stumble upon something, and that's what it was like walking through those stacks. You would just find the oddest things. That's where I discovered Mad magazine. They had these old bound copies of Mads, which were confusing to me, and I didn't understand. I hadn't seen any of the old movies they were spoofing, but you know, but it was still it was bizarre and fascinating. And yeah, that library meant a lot to me. My most vivid memory of it is actually kind of a negative one, but I wanted to present it positively, like is it shows you how much I loved it. There was, I remember I returned. Of course I was a rule follower when it came to the library. I returned everything on time, and I was a very good kid in that way. And the library thought that I had somehow, they lost my copy of Stephen King's Different Seasons that I turned in, and I had to, or my mom or someone had to pay for it but I did not. I mean, I turned that thing in, so I was sort of traumatized by that, but I loved it there.
That's fair. Having to pay for a book that you know you returned is traumatizing. I had a similar sort of experience with, not with that, but with Mad Magazine. I really liked Mad Magazine, but I had no frame of reference for it. I really liked the art and I liked the humor, but it was, I'm sure, very above my head.
Yeah, the first time I ever encountered The Shining was just for one example, was the Mad Magazine parody of The Shining. So, and this went on for movie after movie after movie. I was introduced to them through Mad.
Yeah, the first exposure I had to The Shining was through The Simpsons. So, you know, you kind of have these frames of reference, and then you see the thing later. That happened with Twin Peaks too, because there's a Simpsons scene that, you know, references Twin Peaks. And then I finally saw it and I was like, oh, that's what that's about. So, Kathe, I was gonna say, I love Interlibrary Loan. I use it all the time. And it's great if you are into, you know, obscure, out of print horror, and that's what I use it for a lot. And it's such a great service because, you know, even if we don't have access to something, we can usually get something from anywhere in the country. And, you know, I don't even know if people are aware that it's something that their libraries offer, but it's so great, and it's, you know, not at any cost additional to the patron. So And then Alma, I like hearing that you were a page, because I always say, libraries are such a great place to work, and there's so much room for growth. And if you're into libraries, you can work at a page, and then you can sort of work into any field. It's a great place to grow.
And the funniest thing is I never thought about becoming a librarian, though. It's like these were, adults with such skills, and it was almost like being a priest in a way, right? I just didn't aspire to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I should mention, just for the bonus points that I'll get, that I am a licensed librarian. I did go to library school and I worked as a librarian. I only got to work as a librarian for a couple years before I went sort of down a different path. But yeah, I'm one of you.
That's all right. I went to school and majored in creative writing, and then I became a librarian. So it's sort of the opposite.
Interesting.
Yeah. So speaking of writing, I want to talk to you all about how you first realized that you wanted to become writers, and how you began to sort of navigate that and get into writing professionally.
Do you want me to start this time?
Sure.
So I don't always put the pressure on Kathy. Well, it was the reading, and I think this is a very common experience for writers. Being a little kid that's kind of introverted, and so you spend all your time in books, and I think it becomes very natural to try to want to write a story that recreates the stories that are giving you so much pleasure. And I remember one of my professors in grad school saying, your early attempts at writing are often mimemic. You're trying to reproduce something that you really like. So mine were no different. But here's the weird thing, and I'm going to show my age, because, like when you guys were talking about Mad Magazine, for instance, I was there when stuff, like the early ones, right? And Kathy, when you're talking about interlibrary loans, I'm so old, my library didn't have that when I was young. But anyway, there was a TV show called The Courtship of Eddie's Father, and one of the main characters was the photographer, and he was like really wacky. And I just loved the magazine part of that show so much that I started writing my own like newspaper in school. I was trying to imitate that. And the teachers were just like, wow, this is so creative of you. And what happens as soon as you get feedback, that first time you want to keep going. And that was really the beginning that made me want to start writing. And I didn't stop. When I was a teenager, I wrote. I was a stringer at newspapers when I was still a teenager. It wasn't until I went to the intelligence community that I actually had to stop writing. And I ended up stop writing fiction. I mean, they couldn't stop me from doing that. But at that point, I was so demoralized. Anyway, I stopped writing for about 15 years, and I didn't come back to fiction until I was 40. But yep, that's how I got started in The Courtship of Eddie's Father.
That's so crazy. I have always been a writer. I started writing when I was a little person, and the words were like this big on the papers like this, and the words are like this. But absolutely what Alma says about you're trying to reproduce things that intrigued or delighted you, and you're also trying to do it in a way that makes the process more transparent to you. It's like, okay, what did they do here? How did they make this story happen about this chicken? How did they make this story happen about this little girl? How is the mechanics of the thing working, as well as how can I recreate for other people that feeling of happiness and delight that I had reading? And that's a lifelong process too. That will be there. The horizon is always ahead of you, which thank God for that. But I know that sometimes looking at narrative you have to separate yourself from your work as well, because you are only one reader of your work, right? So you're doing the best you can to create it, but you're not the final answer. And once it's out in the world, people are going to read it with their own apparatus, the same way that we have all had the experience of people giving us a book that they really loved and said, oh, you must read this. And you start reading it and you do not love it. You just don't. And you want to, because your friend is like, but you don't have that, you don't have the receptors for that. You don't have the apparatus for it. And that was one of the harder languages to learn, to understand that not everyone is going to speak your language, right? Not everyone is going to love what you, not even what you wrote, but what you love. And I think horror can be both welcoming and polarizing, because there are some people who won't touch it with a barge pole, right? Like, oh, can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, I started as a little kid. It was something fun I did with a friend of mine who lived in my neighborhood, and we would write stories as just sort of something to show to each other. And we had a folder of monsters that we'd draw, and he had his monsters and I draw my monsters, and then they would kind of fight each other in the stories. By the time I was maybe in upper elementary school, I was writing quite long stories, and they were essentially fan fiction. I wrote a notebook length Nightmare on Elm Street book, and I wrote a Gremlins clone, and then by the time I was in middle school and certainly high school, I was writing novel length books. And I think what I like to talk about when it comes to this is that it did really help the entire rest of my career, that I would write these books and not show them to anyone. Like the world was different. There wasn't really a place you could upload it online and get people to read it. Or I would write these things just because I loved writing them, and I'd put them immediately in a drawer, and with no intention of ever showing them to anyone. And I think this allowed me to develop a sort of pattern of working where it was never about the release. It was never about the publication. And to this day, I have to make myself get excited for publication. Almost 100% of my interest is just in the writing, just doing the writing, and it's satisfying to my own, my own appetites. There's nothing really beyond that for me.
You all write things that are outside of the horror genre, but of course we're here to talk about horror. So I want to ask, what attracts you to the horror genre? Why did you want to write horror? And what do you think that it offers readers that is maybe different than other genres that you might have written?
Well, I'll go first this time to give the others a break. I think it's kind of what Kathe said. There's something both welcoming and polarizing about it. And I think I've always, from a really young age, where I would purposely scare myself. Like if I was scared of something under the bed, I would go under the bed and I would sleep under the bed. It doesn't mean I liked it, but I mean, I would repeatedly do these kind of things, kind of these slight self-torture things. So I think there's something about that. There's a certain kind of personality that I think is scared and does not want to repeat that experience, and that makes perfect sense. And there's another personality that is scared and then wants to play with that, like figure out, why was I scared? Why did I react like this? And kind of come back to it. The person who sees the scary movie and makes them so scared they're sick, but then can't stop thinking about it and wants to see it again to see how they react to it. And that was definitely me. To me, it's a genre in which you can really kind of dig deep into oneself and find out kind of what makes you tick in a little way, and how far you're willing to go. And that's not all subgenres of horror, but it's certainly a space that I write in sometimes.
I like it because I find it comforting. I think having experienced a certain amount of chaos in your life makes you both cognizant of the boundaries, or where there are no boundaries, but it also makes you you understand that there are places where there are no rules will apply, or no rules that you can imagine or fathom. And once you know that those places are out there, knowing where they are becomes very helpful and very familiar. And it's like in the old westerns where the guy is like got shot in the saloon, and he says, "Give it to me straight, doc." It's like, okay, give it to me straight. How bad is it really? Show me the bottom. If you can show me the bottom, then I can try and function my way either out of that or through it or with it or whatever. But if I don't even know where the bottom is, then I'm lost. And I think horror is one way that we can approach that feeling of show me where the bottom is. And I think too that it sometimes can conversely be used as a crutch to say, but then the monster was vanquished and all was well. But a lot of times it does not happen, and it's not going to happen. And horror should be able to take us to those places too, to say, you can exist without comfort. You can exist without a final resolution, because a lot of times you're just never going to get that, especially in the larger world.
The thing I find interesting about horror is, now this is going to sound really bleak, but, there is a lot of pain and hurt and misery in life. And the thing about horror is that it doesn't hide the fact that we're going to explore those things. We're going to explore the scary things. We're going to explore the things that hurt us. It gives us an opportunity. And I think we're all kind of saying the same thing here. It's just sort of slightly different in the approach. But the thing that I like about horror is that it's kind of open about it, right? As opposed to maybe, all fiction helps us deal with the truths about life, the bad as well as the good, mostly the bad, right? Because we don't really need a book to help us figure out how to deal with the good things in life, but we're all going to have a measure of bad things in our lives. And, what I find, especially these days about horror, first of all, it's a very big tent. There's all kinds of books now that sort of horror and horror adjacent, as Daniel said. But there's so much incredibly well-written, empathetic horror novels out there right now. So when I hear people say, "Oh, I don't do horror," or "I don't read horror," they don't want to be argued with, but I'd like to argue with them, because I get the sense that they're probably talking about a very narrow range, like maybe the Saw movies on I don't watch Saw movies. Okay, I'll give you that. But there's other things that are considered part of the genre that actually I think a lot of sensitive readers would probably really, really love.
Yeah, I agree. There's and in the library field, a lot of librarians are, scared of horror and scared of interacting with their patrons about horror, just because they're not used to reading it. And I think a lot of it is they have this notion that it is gore, when there's so much more to the genre than that, and it really is a space to sort of explore a bunch of different things. And it was just making me think, like, I don't really like to read about gore, and medical horror is probably the thing that I can't deal with the most, like the human body and what happens to it. There's too much weird stuff that happens to it, so but yeah, I think horror is a way for us to sort of process, right, the scary things in life, and not even desensitizing yourself to it, but just sort of coming to terms with it. And I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but like The Exorcist is maybe so scary when you see it and you first experience it, but now I kind of have it on in the background while I'm doing things around the house, and it's just like things sort of lose the horrific quality if you sort of interact with it, and process it a little bit. So
Great. I'd love to recommend this one anthology, for instance, which I think is a great example. It's called Miscreations. It came out about a year ago, and it's got a lot of real up and coming or current stars of horror in it. But I got to do the foreword for it. So I was reading through all the books, and I was just you know, really amazed and very happy to see just how beautiful so many of the stories are. They really, you know, all of us feels like a monster at some point in our lives. And these are stories that just help you understand how we all go through this and how we deal with it, you know. Uh, um, so if you have a patron out there who says they don't want horror, I suggest you put that anthology in their hands.
Yeah, that's great. It's been on my list, and I love the cover. I can picture the cover in my head. So I wanted to talk about sort of the medical horror aspect and how, you know, like I don't want anything to do with it as a person who enjoys horror. I'm curious if you guys like reading about the things that you find scary in real life, or if you prefer to read about things that are sort of away from what you find scary in life.
You know, this book, The Hunger, is about the Donner Party, which is maybe the most famous American episode of cannibalism. And you know, I'm not fascinated by cannibalism. I think most people, you know, wouldn't choose to read about cannibalism just for fun or anything like that. But of course, you have to when you go to write the book, right? So I learned so much about cannibalism. There's no cannibalism in this book. We purposely put it off because um, you know, you guys know when you write a book, there's so much revision, right? There were over 200 pages that got cut from the first draft of this book. So there was some scenes that explored that. But the more my editor and I worked on it, we realized, you know, that's what people were expecting. And so we wanted to put it off for as long as possible. So this was sort of an interesting exploration of how to write horror about something that could be a really like gruesome, gory topic, a medical topic, if you will. But ended up not being. And that's another reason why I kind of think this is a book for people who think they don't want to read horror because it's sort of an exercise in suspense.
Know if there are things that I will read to confront terror or to think about horror or to feel those feelings. I get plenty of that from real life. There are things there are tropes I can't stand anymore, and film is a major offender here. Animal cruelty or animals being harmed, and it's like, no, especially when they're used as signifiers for someone being bad. Like, you know, this guy is bad because he did X to a dog. Done. Don't ever want to see it or read about it again. And it is kind of a cheap stand-in for, I mean, the same way with threatening little Timmy, right? You know, but little Timmy's going to make it through. You're almost positive. Little Timmy's dog, probably not. That I cannot read. Instances of cruelty, I can't read. I can't make myself read those things. But the example I use for that is the film Pan's Labyrinth, where a person is being verbally tormented by another character, and it's so difficult to watch. There is no blood, there is no gore, there is no nothing, but this universe of cruelty is there in that exchange, and that is real hard to read. There is nothing to touch that cruelty in the cipher, I will tell you that. Although there is an instance in here where an animal is used that if I could rewrite this book, I would take that out. I don't like it. I don't approve of it. I would get rid of it if I could. But when anything innocent is threatened, that is also a basis for a lot of horror or dark fiction, where because your sensibilities instantly go towards the helpless, and you want to protect the helpless from being brutalized or eaten or whatever. You just don't want that to happen to the little ones or the helpless ones. So that is hard to read. Everything else, I'm pretty good. That's weird.
I think my answers were pretty short. But yeah, I don't think I have any things that I won't read about. You know, I had and have the same thing you have in some ways, Conrad. Like, my biggest phobia is getting blood drawn. Like I almost, it is very difficult for me. And for a long time, I couldn't watch scenes of needle related scenes or and reading them is difficult. Somehow I've gotten past that, not in real life, but in art. I can read about it and watch movies. But if it's a, I saw something recently that had, and with COVID, they're always showing needles going into arms constantly now. So I do look away sometimes with that. But no, but broadly on just sort of, do I seek out things that will upset me? I think sometimes I do. I think I don't know what it is and what kind of what that says about anyone. It's probably nothing too terrible. But I think sometimes want to see if this thing is going to upset me like I think it will. I don't know why.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't mind getting shots. Like, that's cool. I just can't watch it being done. And I also hate needles going in. I have to look away. It's like the most squeamish thing I feel for someone who likes horror and often does not actually mind bloody stuff in films. Just, it gets me. So right, I'm sure a lot of our friends think of us as mostly horror fans, but obviously I'm sure we all have a lot of sort of a different reading interests. And so I'm really curious to know, what's something that you enjoy reading that people maybe wouldn't expect, or just that's so far outside the horror genre that they don't seem to mesh.
Mm.
Well, I have unfortunately, I live many lives. So, first I have to say, I don't really read a ton of horror. And in the past, I didn't read a ton, I didn't like read the canon, so to speak. I was probably a little bit more of a speculative fiction reader when I was younger growing up. And that's why it's kind of always stuck with me. So I always feel sort of apologetic, and I love listening to what other readers have, recommend or what they read. You made Frankenstein in Baghdad just sound so good, Daniel. I can't wait to pick it up, even though I feel a little guilty because I was actually in the office of the Secretary of Defense for the Iraq War Planning. I was one of the people who were trying to get them to not do it, and it almost ruined my career. But still, anything that has to do with Iraq, I always feel a little queasy about. But so people might not be surprised to find out. So I had like this long career in intelligence, and I actually work in emerging technologies. So I read a ton of technology news every day. Horrific or not horrific, just sort of depends on how you feel about technology, I guess. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. And I love to read just like mysteries, like really well-written mysteries. Denise Minna, the Scottish mystery writer is one of my favorites. Laura Lippman, I love her work. She's just getting better and better, it seems, every year.
I read everything, and my movie watching is the same. I think I probably read and watch more horror than the average earthling on the street, but it's still just a small percentage of what I take in. I consciously try to absorb the broadest range of stuff I can. So that's anything. That's history, mystery, romance. I mean, everything. It all makes my work better. Whenever I'm really inspired by something I've seen in a movie or something I read, it's almost 0% is it ever horror. It comes from other genres and other directions.
Yeah, same. I follow my nose, so I'm reading whatever because I was looking at my shelf and going, oh, what is here that is recent but it all kind of goes together. Robert McFarlane's Underland is something I read just recently, and it blew me away. I came to it from a movie about mushrooms, and it's beautifully written, and it's also takes you literally underground and to look at the way the world works, what is happening there, go in the Paris catacombs, go in these caves, go in all these places. And in some ways, it's such a perfect metaphor for, the excavation of the self, the unconscious, but it's also really cool information about things that are going on underground that we don't know anything about. So yeah, everything kind of links together, but I don't see those linkages. And I watch a lot of heartwarming animal videos, like a lot of them. So maybe that's like my guilty pleasure, although I don't feel guilty.
Yeah, animal videos make everyone feel better. Just, I mean, I'm personally a dog person, but funny dogs, oh my gosh. I mean, it's just, that'll brighten your day. Yeah, Kathy, I was checking out your shelf. I noticed the Song of Achilles at the top. I have that copy. It's so good. I
Oh,
love
I
it.
love that. And that's an example of a book that I would never have come to. I came to that through Twitter. There's a
Oh,
Song of Achilles bot that it literally tweets lines from Song of Achilles. And for whatever reason, I started following him. I'm like, God, this is so good. And I got the book from the library,
oh,
from an
nice.
interlibrary loan. And then I loved it so much, I knew that because I do not purchase a lot of books now. Almost all my reading is from libraries. I very rarely will buy a book now. I'm at the stage where I am deaccessioning books. But yes, I loved that book. In fact, these are probably, Underland is there too. Song of Achilles and Maurice Meyer's Heartbreaker and The Seventh Mansion. And I know Dan is a huge fan of Maurice as well. These three books are pretty much a library in themselves.
Yeah.
So
As a librarian, I surprisingly buy a large number of books. Uh, I just, there's usually it's because what I'm interested in reading a lot of times is harder to come by, and a lot of times the newer stuff that I'm reading is from the library. But I still buy too many books. I also noticed the Brontes, and I want to say my poster behind me is Bronte Country. so I have them on my wall. I
oh
love
yeah,
them, and that's sort of my thing is I love classics and Victorian literature, and I love the Brontes. I love Thomas Hardy, Charles Dickens. I just really enjoy them, and many people don't. It doesn't mean I have read Moby Dick or War and Peace, but I still want to give them a chance.
and too, a lot of the that's another genre where there are misconceptions of what you'll find if you actually read those books, right? It's like, oh, I don't read those kinds of books because XYZ. The same, as Alma was saying about horror. Oh, I don't, but you don't, you are giving it this coat of paint that it may not have inside. Just open it. You will know right away if a book is for you or not. You
Yeah.
don't even have to read it all to the end. It's just, you can just throw it down.
Yeah, and Kathy, you recommended a couple books, and so I want to ask you all, what are some books that are recent or not even recent necessarily, that you want to suggest people read, that you think not enough people know about?
Gosh, well, I think I blew my thoughts earlier. But then when you said Thomas Hardy, everything I had prepared in advance just went right out of my head because I love Thomas Hardy, right? How can you not, if you're slightly depressive, right? He's the writer. Oh yeah, Mayor of Casterbridge. If you haven't read Mayor of Casterbridge, you should read that one. Again, I'll give the shout out for Denise Minna. I mean, she's pretty popular, but I don't know how many people in America really know her. Her book Conviction, I guess, got picked up by Reese or Oprah, and so maybe she's become a little bit more popular here in the States. And of course, local girl Laura Lippman down in Baltimore. She's really just gotten fabulous. But the noir she did a couple years ago, Sunburn, I just love that book. If you love noir, you definitely have to read that book.
I mean, as Kathy said, I'm a big fan of Maurice Meyer's, and Kathy's book, The Cipher, is, my favorite horror novel, certainly, and right up there among possibly my favorite novel, period. I haven't actually worked that out yet, but it's up there. So, I mean, I guess to stick with horror or sort of dark fiction for recommendations. There's a great book that I love to recommend because I don't feel like people know it, and it's by an author named Gina Woolsdorf, and it's called Security. And my favorite, the slasher genre is not my favorite horror genre. It doesn't mean I don't occasionally enjoy it, but this is a slasher book, which always feels to me like that's certainly not going to work, because slasher is so based on jump scares and stuff. but man, this book is great. It is so good. It's all being told by someone looking at security monitors. And so what it has this really amazing device where occasionally someone will be looking at, let's say, 2 monitors at once, and the page splits into 2 columns, and then maybe they're looking at 3 monitors, it splits into 3 columns, and so you're getting multiple storylines at once. I just think it's a great book that didn't get its due. I think it could have been like a Gone Girl level hit. It's so good. What else? There's so much. I'll mention one other randomly. It's there's this old book, I don't know how old, 70s maybe, called The Late Great Creature by Brock Cole. And this book was actually nominated for a National Book Award. It has since completely fallen off the radar. And it's sort of this kind of fake autobiography of this kind of Bela Lugosi type actor who is doing some final act where he's being buried alive, and he's kind of telling his life story, and it's just weird and hilarious and absurd and just a real like great American novel type novel that has just been kind of forgotten.
Well, you sound like you have like so many great books squirreled away, that you've read. I'd love to just like talk to you all day and hear about these relatively obscure books. Gosh.
We can do it. Let's do it.
Say the name of the writer of Security again.
Gina Wohlsdorf, Wohlsdorf.
Okay, thank you.
Can I give a shout out for a book that's coming out? It's The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward, I think. I just can't say enough about it. It reminded me a lot of Observatory Mansions by, I'm going to mess up that guy's name. Maybe someone else remembers, but it has more of a horror turn to it. But it's just really so well done and unexpected in so many ways. I think it's coming out this fall.
Kathe, do you have any other ones you want to talk about?
No, I totally want to beat the drum for Maurice because I don't know anyone else, not only who is doing what she does, but who can do what she does. The Seventh Mansion, in fact, this is for anyone who thinks that they don't like horror or they don't like dark subjects or there is no way to adequately explain this book, and I would not even try, but I've been so blown away by Maurice's work. Heartbreaker is a collection of her short fiction. She has another one, and she has another book called Rag, but these are the two that there is no way that you could read either of these and come out unchanged, especially The Seventh Mansion. I cannot say enough about it.
Yeah, it was my favorite book from last year.
Wow.
Nice. Yeah. And speaking of books, do you all have any upcoming projects or recent books that you want to talk about, stuff you have coming up?
Does it have to be horror?
No, it can be anything.
All right. I'm a shameless whatever. This is my spy novel that just came out. It's actually going to be a TV series on Fox. It's been doing, thank you. I know, it's a miracle. Just been thrilled. It's been doing really well. It got picked as a New York Times editor's choice, and Intel people have been coming out of the woodwork saying that it's the most accurate reflection of what it's like to work in the IC. And the reason I'm so proud of it is because it's from a woman's perspective. The main characters are women. I really wanted to show what it's like because women are not well represented in contemporary, espionage culture, whether it's TV, movies, or books. So the fact that it's gotten any reception at all and hasn't just been dismissed because it's not another Jason Bourne or something is, I think, a little bit of a miracle. So sorry to hijack things, but yeah, I'm just really thrilled, and I hope people will continue to give it a chance.
I am doing this all day, every day. Dark Factory is, it's a novel, it's a project, it's all kinds of things. It's immersive fiction that has taken on a life of its own and is going to be, the narrative is going to be available to people in a lot of different ways, in a lot of formats. So I am really excited to see. I give a huge shout out to my publisher, Meerkat. Yes, that what those dogs said. That is how I feel about Meerkat.
I knew that was going to happen.
It's perfect timing, actually.
They waited for me to talk too. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I've got the second and third of this Teddy's trilogy. That's kind of about teddy bears, but it's also very creepy. You can kind of tell.
Wow.
And I've got a comic book that's almost the 7th of 8 issues is about to come out. So that's called The Autumnal. It's actually what this poster is right here. So that's sort of what it looks like. Well, one of the issues. And then I've got a bunch of other stuff, and none of it's been announced, but lots of books and graphic novels and cool things coming up.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and so before we kind of wrap up for today, I want to talk a little bit more about libraries, because obviously we're here to support librarians. And so I want to talk about, sort of the role that libraries play in your life today and why people should support their local libraries.
Their civilization. When COVID came and shut everything down, the day that my library, my local library, found a way to make sure that patrons could get books and that you could still check out books and get them, it literally made you want to cry, because it was saying, okay, everything is weird and bad now, but we're still going to go on, and here's the way we figured out how to go on. It did feel like civilization had reasserted itself. I can't think of any local institution that would have made me feel the same way. It is a bedrock of what it means to be human and literate, and there is no more important institution than that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've used the library more in the last year than I have since I was a little kid. And this has become like an hour infomercial for Interlibrary Loan, but I've been doing a lot of research on kind of an esoteric topic, and I just got so many books through ILL. I mean, I'm here in Chicago, so there's a lot of libraries, but this is some fringy stuff I was looking up, yeah, like I think it was the only place for a long time that I went during the pandemic, the only indoor place that I would go. So yeah, can you say it? I mean, Kathe's right. It's like, if we don't have libraries, what do we have at the end of the day?
Right. It's a real bedrock of civil society. And it's really, that leveling the playing field when it comes to access to knowledge is just so like intrinsically American, right? I can't think of a town in America that would be a town without a library.
Yeah, I like to think that we, try to treat everyone equitably, and we are not concerned with sort of where someone has been or what's happened to them in their lives, but more, where they're trying to go and helping them get there, right? I think there's a lot of empathy in libraries, and that it's an important place because you can go there and feel like you matter, and I think that's so great, and it can sometimes be hard to come by, and so I love libraries. And so lastly, the last question I want to ask is where viewers can learn more about you or connect with you on social media.
You can just go to my website, danielkraus.com, and that'll have all the various links you need.
I'm at almakatsubooks.com.
I'm KatheKoja.com, and I run my mouth a lot on Twitter, so you can always find me there too.
Nice. And any librarians that are interested in booking any of our authors today, feel free to reach out to me at Konrad with a KS at thelibrary.org. So KONRADS at thelibrary.org. I want to thank all of our panelists today, and I'd like to thank all of our viewers for watching. Thanks, and have a good day.